Hey everybody, coming to you from the Big Blue Chair. This is one of my favorite reading spots in my house. And we're going to pick up where we left off in Holes, chapter 37. So Stanley and Zero have met up in the desert. They found each other after both running away from Camp Green Lake. And they've managed to walk all the way to the mountain. They went in search of the thumb. And they've climbed up and they're almost there. They're almost at the top. We don't know what's at the top yet, but hopefully there's some water because they are in rough shape. Zero is getting sick because of the peaches that he ate in those jars, and Stanley hasn't drank in any water either, so hopefully there's some water up there for them. Chapter 37. We're almost there, said Stanley. He could see the base of the mountain. Now that they were really almost there, it scared him. Big Thumb was his only hope. If there was no water, no refuge, then they'd have nothing, not even hope. There was no exact place where the flat land stopped and the mountain began. The ground got steeper and steeper, and then there was no doubt that they were heading up the mountain. Stanley could no longer see Big Thumb. The slope of the mountain was in the way. It became too steep to go straight up. Instead, they had to zigzag back and forth, increasing their altitude by small amounts every time they changed direction. Patches of weeds and plants dotted the mountainside. They walked from one patch to another, using the weeds as footholds. As they got higher up, the weeds got thicker. Many had thorns, and they had to be careful walking through them. Stanley would have liked to stop and rest, but he was afraid that they'd never get started again. As long as Zero could keep going, he could keep going too. Besides, he knew they didn't have much daylight left. As the sky darkened, bugs began appearing above the weed patches. A swarm of gnats hovered around them, attracted by their sweat. Neither Stanley nor Zero had the strength to try to swat at them. How are you doing? Stanley asked. Zero pointed thumbs up. Then he said, If a gnat lands on me, it will knock me over. Stanley gave him some more words. B-U-G-S, he spelled. Zero concentrated hard, then said, Boogs. Stanley laughed. A wide smile spread across Zero's sick and weary face as well. Bugs, he said. Good, said Stanley. Remember, it's a short U sound if there's no E at the end. Okay, here's a hard one. How about L-U-N-C-H? Suddenly, Zero made a horrible, wrenching noise as he doubled over and grabbed his stomach. His frail body shook violently, and he threw up, emptying his stomach of what he had eaten. The sploosh. He leaned on his knees and took several deep breaths. Then he straightened up and continued going. The swarm of gnats stayed behind, preferring the contents of Zero's stomach to the sweat on the boys' faces. It's kind of gross. Stanley didn't give him any more words, thinking that he needed to save his strength. But about 10 or 15 minutes later, Zero said, Lunch. As they climbed higher, the patches of weeds grew thicker, and they had to be careful not to get their feet tangled in thorny vines. Stanley suddenly realized something. There hadn't been any weeds or plants on the lake. Weeds and bugs, he said. There's gotta be water around somewhere. We must be getting close. A wide, clown-like smile spread across Zero's face. He flashed the thumbs-up sign, then fell. He didn't get up. Stanley bent over him. Come on, Zero, he urged. We're getting close. Come on, Hector. Weeds and bugs. Weeds and boogs. Stanley shook him. I've already ordered your hot fudge sundae, he said. They're making it right now. Zero said nothing. So it looks like Zero's not able to keep going. They're so close. They know there's water around because there's bugs flying around and there's weeds growing, which are signs that there could be water. But Zero can't walk anymore. He just passed out. What do you think? Do you think Stanley's going to carry him? I feel like he will. Chapter 38. It's another short one. Stanley took hold of Zero's forearms and pulled him upright. Then he stooped down and let Zero fall over his right shoulder. He stood up, lifting Zero's worn-out body off the ground. He left the shovel and sack of jars behind as he continued up the mountain. Zero's legs dangled in front of him. Stanley couldn't see his feet, which made it difficult to walk through the tangled patches of weeds and vines. He concentrated on one step at a time, carefully raising and setting down each foot. He thought only about each step, and not the impossible task that lay before him. The higher and higher he climbed, his strength came from somewhere deep inside himself, and also seemed to come from the outside as well. After focusing on Big Thumb for so long, it was as if the rock had absorbed his energy and now acted like a kind of giant magnet pulling him toward it. After a while, he became aware of a foul odor. At first he thought it came from Zero, but it seemed to be in the air, hanging heavy all around him. He also noticed that the ground wasn't as steep anymore. As the ground flattened, a huge stone precipice rose up ahead of him, just barely visible in the moonlight. It seemed to grow bigger with each step he took. It no longer resembled a thumb. And he knew he'd never be able to climb it. Around him, the smell became stronger. It was the bitter smell of despair. Despair meaning no hope. Even if he could somehow climb Big Thumb, he knew he couldn't find water. How could there be water at the top of a giant rock? The weeds and bugs survived only by an occasional rainstorm, like the one he had seen from camp. Still, he continued toward it. If nothing else, he wanted to at least reach the thumb. He never made it. His feet slipped out from under him. Zero's head knocked against the back of his shoulder as he fell and tumbled into a small, muddy gully. As he lay face down in the muddy ditch, he didn't know if he'd ever get up again. He didn't know if he'd even try. Had he come all this way just to... Wait, you need water to make mud. He crawled along the gully in the direction that seemed the muddiest. The ground became gloppier. The mud splashed up as he slapped the ground. Using both hands, he dug a hole in the soggy soil. It was too dark to see, but he thought he could feel a tiny pool of water at the bottom of his hole. He stuck his head in the hole and licked the dirt. He dug deeper, and as he did so, more water seemed to fill the hole. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it, first with his fingers, then with his tongue. He dug until he had a hole that was about as deep as his arm was long. There was enough water for him to scoop out with his hands and drop on Zero's face. He dug until he had a hole that was about as deep as... Oh, wait, I just read that part. Zero's eyes remained closed, but his tongue poked out between his lips, searching for the droplets of water. Stanley dragged Zero closer to the hole. He dug. Then he scooped some more water and let it pour out of his hands into Zero's mouth. As he continued to widen his hole, his hand came across a smooth, round object. It was too smooth and too round to be a rock. He wiped the dirt off of it and realized it was an onion. He bit into it without peeling it. The hot, bitter juice burst into his mouth. He could feel it all the way up to his eyes, and when he swallowed, he felt its warmth move down his throat and into his stomach. He only ate half. He gave the other half to Zero. "Here, eat this." "What is it?" Zero whispered. "A hot fudge sundae," Stanley said. So they did find something up at the top. What did they find? An onion and water. An onion. Who stole onions? Yeah, it was Sam. But how did an onion get to the top of the thumb? I don't know. But that has to have something to do with Sam, doesn't it? Who could have put onions up there? Maybe it was Sam. Maybe that's where he grew his onions, in his secret farm, right? Remember, people didn't really know where he grew them. It was across the lake. He always had to row across the lake. I wonder if Sam grew his onions at the top of the thumb. And these are magic onions. They heal people, according to the story that we heard. I wonder if this is going to help them recover. Very interesting. That's the end of chapter 38. Next, we have chapter 39, and then only a few more chapters left of the story. We'll see what happens next. I enjoyed reading to you guys. See you next time.